Welcome to the Connected Leadership Podcast Live. I'm Andy Lapata. Thank you very much for joining me. I've got a special treat today and a really interesting guest to join us before I take a week off and have a bit of a break. So I'm leaving in a little bit of style. I wouldn't say I was demonstrating any style this morning. If any of you caught my inadvertent live stream this morning, I'm really hoping no one did. I had to record some answers to questions from a presentation I gave for the New York Public Library yesterday, and I decided to start my day with that video. So I used the same software that I used to live stream. So I sat down here. I started to answer the questions. As normal, when I'm recording stuff, I ummed and awed. I might have sworn a little bit. I picked some food out of my teeth, all the sort of things you do when no one's watching you, until I realised that I'd actually been streaming live for a minute and a half. So if you saw that, please tell me you haven't recorded it. I've quickly deleted it, and hopefully it will never be seen again. And really, I shouldn't have told you. Could have left it as everyone's secret, but I know someone's bound to have seen it. So on to today's guest. We met, I would say, about 5 or 6 weeks ago through the panel that I've mentioned before to some people that I joined a New York-based panel run by my guest a couple of weeks ago, Ruth Gautian, for the Mentor Project in America. And Devon was the special guest. We got on well, loved what he had to say. What I said seemed to resonate with Devon as well. So we connected, we chatted, and I said, come on the podcast. And if you're of my generation, you will have fond memories of a film called Cool Runnings, starring John Candy. It was a very funny film. It was a big hit back in the day, and it told the story of the first Jamaican team to compete at the Winter Olympics, the Jamaican bobsled team. Now, as we'll go on to demonstrate, it is a story and maybe not as close to the truth as romantics might like to think. But my guest today was one of the actual team, the first Jamaican bobsled team to appear at the Winter Olympics. He grew up in the slums of Kingston in Jamaica. He went from there to study at the Sandhurst Military Academy in the UK. For those of you outside the UK who don't know Sandhurst, it's a very prestigious military academy. All of the top officers come through there. And then he went on to join the military, and it was a team of military officers who formed that bobsled team. Since then, he's forged a career as a motivational speaker and a coach, and encouraging everyone to share just some of the gems from his own career. So I thought it would be a great guest to tell the true story of Cool Runnings for us, share some of the key lessons he took from the experience, particularly when it comes to leadership and professional relationships. And I think there's a few other things we can explore in the conversation as well. So would you please welcome Devon Harris. Devon, welcome to the Connected Leadership Podcast.
Hey, Andy, it's so good to be able to connect with you on the Connected Leadership Podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
Exactly what it's all about, exactly what it's for. If you are joining us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, please feel free to type in the comments. Tell us where you are. I know where you're watching because it will tell me, but where are you based in the world? And if you've got any questions or comments, I will get to them as I can throughout the broadcast. Bear in mind, we are recording this for publication on the Connected Leadership Podcast in a couple of weeks, so I have to bear the flow of that in mind as well, but I will bring you in as I can. In case you think you're watching live but you're actually watching at a different time, it is now Tuesday afternoon in the UK at 2:10. So if you're now watching this on Thursday, I'm sorry, I'm on holiday. But please feel free to leave your comments anyway. Devon, I'm sure you'll be happy to pick up comments after the event as well. I hope so. And Devon and I are connected on LinkedIn and Facebook, so he'll see them on both. So let's get into the meat of it, Devon. As I said, Cool Runnings was a seminal film for my generation, and you were part of the actual team, the first Jamaican bobsled team to take part in any international competition. But can we get to the true story? because I've heard a lot over the years that the film is a long way distant from the truth. So let's start. How did a team from Jamaica end up competing in the bobsled at the Winter Olympics?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy, one that I'm asked all the time. And I always start with the film itself because at the end, when the credits are rolling, it says based on the story of the Jamaican bobsled team, or maybe it said based on a true story. And there are two words missing there, very loosely based on the true story of the Jamaican bobsled team. So it's 1987, and I've recently returned from Sandhurst, and I'm having this intense conversation with myself about what the hell am I going to do with the rest of my life now that I've accomplished my major dream of becoming an army officer. And I remembered that I had this thing called the Olympics that I wanted to compete in. I'm like, oh, so I started training, hoping to compete in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, not Calgary, Canada. Never heard of Calgary before. Run about that time, two Americans who lived in Jamaica, they saw push cart. If you've seen the movie, Sanka was racing this wooden cart down a winding mountain road. To these guys, it looked like bobsledding, except for the ice. And then discovered that a big part of the race is a start. You need sprinters. We have lots of sprinters. But the guys on the summer team weren't interested in this harebrained idea. So they came to the army looking for athletes. And to be honest, when I first heard that Jamaica was looking to start a bobsled team, and I saw this notice in the army that says if you're interested in undergoing dangerous and rigorous training to compete in bobsledding in Calgary, then make yourself known, basically. And I'm like, this has to be the most ridiculous idea ever conceived by man. And I'm like, I'll never do this. Nobody could ever get me to go on one of these things. But then my colonel had other ideas. He told me to go to the team trials. Now, I'd like to think that he thought I was this amazing athlete, but there's a philosophy in the army that says officers must always participate. So the colonel figured he'd send his young, fit officer to the team trials just to say, hey, I had my officer there. Well, I was going to the team trials, and the way I'm wired, Andy, is like I'm not one of those also ran kind of guy. Now that I was going to the team trials, I just had to make the team. How was I going to do it? I don't know. I knew I was what I would describe as army fit. I could walk 100 miles with 50 pounds on my back and a rifle in my hand, but for 2 years to that point, I hadn't really done enough sports training, so I wasn't sports fit. And I'm thinking if you're going to go to the Olympics, you have to be really, really fit. But I went to the team trials, man, and I tried my darnest. And I think they liked my smile and they selected me.
So I'm guessing that having spent time studying at Sandhurst in the UK, you weren't a stranger to ice and snow. I mean, we don't get a huge amount here, but we do get it. Did that make it easier for you to picture it? What about your teammates? Had they gone through similar training, similar experience, and had experienced winter sports or ice and snow, or was it new to a lot of people?
So the first time I saw snow was actually when I was at Sandhurst, but not a lot of ice, but it was, as you Brits would say, it was bloody cold. And especially coming from Jamaica, right? Dudley Stokes was also at Sandhurst. He was a captain at the time. Um, but none of that experience in at Sandhurst, certainly in terms of the cold, can prepare you for bobsledding in any real way. Having said that, interestingly, I would say that it was my Sandhurst experience overall, though, that helped me in those early days. Because when you're at Sandhurst, you would go through these long periods of intense physical activity with very little rest. And then you just repeat and you repeat. And the early days of bobsledding were very much like that. Long periods of intense activity, very little rest, and so mentally I kind of went back to Sanders. I'm like, oh, I've done this before. I've been here before, and I kind of relied on that. When we first went to Calgary, to get me through those early, long, cold, dare I say, miserable days as well.
What was your once you had committed to it, because obviously you said this is a crazy idea at the beginning, once you'd committed, we're going to do this, what was the level of belief in the team? Did you think you were going there to make up the numbers? Did you see yourself qualifying for final stages? What was how were you going to measure and define success?
Really good question. So for our team, well, let me back up. Years ago, someone asked, so at what point did you guys didn't believe you could make it? And it was the first time I was ever asked that question. I go, wow, good question. That never happened. We never once believed that we could not make it. Our definition of success was to be competitive at the start. We obviously we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the experience, we didn't have the equipment, we didn't have the money. There were so many things that were going against us, but we figured we could figure out how to push the sled fast. We could run fast, and so we figured we could have a good start time, and we ended up doing that in the foreman. On that second day of race, we pushed the seventh fastest start time. So mission accomplished.
Fantastic. What sort of reception did you get from the rest of the winter sports community?
Again, if you go to Cool Runnings, it suggests that people were mean and berated us and that kind of stuff. And generally, I would say athletes don't treat each other that way. I mean, there may be a team that hates another team or a particular athlete that hates another one, but we didn't have that. I think initially it was, surprise and wonderment. But I would say that we were embraced. I remember being in Innsbruck, Austria, and this British truck rolled up, and all these uh, black guys from the British team rolled off the truck, and they go, "Hey, where's the Jamaican posse?" You know, and we started hanging out with them. I remember being at the Olympics itself, and there are so many things going on there. This was our first, major competition. Imagine being at, I don't know, the World Cup of Soccer, Euro. The Euro 2021 is going on now, and this is the first time you're seeing the big players in their sport, right? That was what it was for us. And I remember sitting there in the warm house where we hang out before we go down the track, just kind of in wonderment, taking in the scene, just soaking up the experience. And this East German pilot or driver, he paused from his preparations and smiled. No words were spoken. He smiled and handed me a pin, which in my mind was saying, "Hey, welcome to the brotherhood of bobsledders." So yeah, it was. Look, Jamaicans are cool, man. Who wants to hate them? Nobody does, right? So we just kind of hung out until, after a while, we got to know everybody, and as the years went on, and we were just kind of one of the boys.
And you talk about athletes tend to be supportive of each other, and from the athletes that I know, no one would ever accuse me of being an athlete, by the way, but the athletes that I know, that's certainly the impression that I've always got. As newcomers to the sport, effectively, were you getting support from other athletes? Were they pointing you in the right direction, or did the competitive instinct not allow that amount of a welcoming
Yeah.
hand?
So this is a really interesting, really good question, and interesting. And I've experienced this multiple times. So before the Olympics, we didn't have a whole lot of time before the Olympics back in '88. But yeah, people are supportive and they'll give you pointers. During the Olympics, that's not happening. My perhaps starkest experience of that is actually sitting in a bar in Park City with a British dude. Actually, he was a coach. He was coaching another country at the time, and I'm like, "Hey, man, how do you become a great driver?" And we're having this intense conversation over a beer, and then I see him in Nagano at the track. And I went up to ask him for some advice, and he goes, "Oh, where's my athlete?" And he just pretended this is my beer buddy. He just pretended not to hear and just walked off. Right? I'm like, well, I get it. This is the Olympics, right? We can talk after.
So have you seen an example similar to that in everyday life, in business life, where there is a time and a place where you build relationships, you support each other, you help each other, but there's a time when people go into their zone and you have to know when is the right time to approach them and when you just stay back.
I have I've not experienced that up front and up close and personal, but I have definitely observed that and heard stories of that. Where even a sales team, guys are friendly, but it's coming to the end of the year, the term, and somebody wants to be the top of the leaderboard, and he's going to do or she's going to do everything they can to be there to get there. And so they may decline, let's say, to help their friend close that deal because they want to make sure that they get to the top. So it's human nature.
So I've been delivering some presentations recently, and twice in the Q&A, the question and answer session, either questions submitted beforehand or during the presentation, people have asked that question. They say, how do you engage with a colleague, engage with someone who sees you as competition and is trying to succeed at your expense rather than collaborate? How would you approach that? Did you find there was competition within the team to get onto the final four? Obviously, we've talked about collaboration versus competition between teams. How would you approach that?
So I think it comes down to personality, but for me personally, I want to be the best. Let's start there. I want to be the best, and I work hard to be the best I can be. If I'm the guy who is, let's say, in second place, I personally support the other guy. I do everything in my power to help them because I really do have ultimate faith in my own abilities. And so, I think back to our team, after 88, I became a driver. And needless to say, I was not the more experienced driver. I was never the more experienced driver, and I was getting my butt whipped. But I was supportive of the other guy. But then I became the better driver. And I have to honestly say that you could cut the air between us. It was that tense. It's not that tense, but I'm like, I'm just here to compete, man. I'm actually not even trying to beat you. I'm trying to be one of the best in the world, but to be the best in the world, I realize I have to start by being the best in Jamaica. When the shoe is on the other foot, I am supportive. I was very supportive of Michael White when he was on the sled for the two-man event instead of me, right? Because in the end, you have to recognize that there's the team vision, and I think this is true across the board, right? There's a team vision and if you have truly bought into it, then you have to do everything in your power to make that happen. And there's a fine line. Sometimes when I do my talks, Andy, I'm talking about being a good teammate. I put up a picture on the screen from 1988, and it's the Jamaican four-man sled going down the hill, and there are two heads with pink goggles looking out. And I go, what's wrong with that? And and they're like, the heads are not aligned. I'm like, yeah, but in addition to that, there should only be one head looking out, and the second head is mine. Because I knew that after the Olympics, I wanted to become a driver, and so I would look over Dudley's head, trying to learn what I can. I'm not sure what I was hoping to learn, but I would look, and so the lesson here is that you have to find a way to remain ambitious, to strive, to keep on pushing, as I say, to become the best you can be, and in the same breath, find a way to subvert, so to kind of pull back on that ambition to make sure that you're playing the role that you're supposed to play on the team to ensure to give the team the best chance for success. So it's a fine line, but I think it's doable.
And I think what really stands out there, I should say, by the way, Chandra Sekar, who's watching on Facebook, has said team vision. And I think that's the perfect caption for picture with the two heads
Yes,
popping out with the goggles, isn't it? Um,
right.
but on that point that Chandra's made of team vision and taking that story into account, that really boils down to trust between teammates, isn't it? Because actually, if I understand this correctly as a visual metaphor, the one person at the front, the driver, is the one who has to see where you're going. The other
Hmm.
three of you have to really sort of scrunch up and put your heads down to be as streamlined as possible to maximize speed. So you have to trust your driver. That's the one who has to know where you're going.
Indeed, indeed.
I'm getting that right? So how do you build that trust when you've got that competition for places and that personal driving ambition as well?
You know, my first trip down a bobsled run, I'm crawling in a sled behind a guy who had never driven a sled before. So that I would even say that's blind trust. You just kind of have to go with it. Um, Again, but how do you build the trust when you're competing against the next guy? I think it comes down to, hey, this is the team vision. This is the direction that we're going. This person is in the lead. You have a responsibility if you're part of the team to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to make this other guy successful or girl successful. Dudley Stokes actually said something to me that I've never forgotten. He says you have to learn to become a good follower if you want to be a good leader, and that is so true. And so when I am in the leadership role, it's not that my ambitions don't burn bright because I'm not going to dull in my ambitions, but I recognize that this is what is needed to help the team to succeed because I want to succeed. I want to succeed at every level. But I also keep those fires of my ambition burning bright because when my opportunity arises, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, and you have to be on board in order to be in that
Yeah.
position, and to do that. All this conversation is sort of taking me in a completely different direction to where I wanted to go originally. Let's come back to your experience at Calgary, and everything that you achieved there. Obviously, coming with no history of the sport in Jamaica, you had to accumulate a lot of knowledge very quickly, that wasn't, I guess, immediately accessible in the community to you. How did you, as a team, access all of the knowledge that you needed and make sure that you were as competitive as you could possibly be?
Eyes and ears wide open, mouth open sometimes. You're just constantly learning, constantly putting yes, yourself in a position where even if someone isn't telling you something, you are watching and trying to pick up, some tips. My friend from Australia has two pictures that he has on Facebook that I think clearly demonstrate that. So when I was at the Olympics, as I said, such an amazing experience on so many different levels, right? You're there competing as hard as you can. You're there soaking up the environment because these people you have never seen before. This is the most intense competition you have ever been in. Um, but at the same time, I was trying to learn. And so whenever I wasn't getting ready to go down the track, I would be standing at the start, watching all the other teams, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, hoping to pick up some tips. And so my friend, he has a picture of me standing at the start watching the Swiss team go, and a picture of me standing at the start watching his team go. And so that's what we did. We people talk about becoming students of the sport. We just became students. We just kept watching and trying to learn something.
And through that learning, and as you integrated that into what you do you think that you brought any new approaches and new ideas to the sport? Anything that's stuck since, that you can look back at and say, that was down to the way we approach things?
Yeah, if you look at many of the bobsled teams, certainly the U.S. and the Canadian teams have employed that with a strong degree of success. They have gone to go find track athletes. right? And look, I guess it's all relative, right? Because quite frankly, none of us were going to make the sprint team in Jamaica. You know, it's just the fact of life. We have so many world class
Yeah.
sprinters, or potential world class sprinters, that yeah, I don't think that it would be fair to say we were among that number. But at the same time, our team got started by finding guys who thought that they could run fast and put them behind a bobsled. And you see that now across the sport of bobsledding. That's a Jamaican phenomena there.
So one more question on the bobsledding. Uh, a couple of answers ago, you talked about the importance of the conflict on a team and learning from each other in that sense. There's been a couple of other people who've said recently on this podcast. Oh no, sorry, I'll take it a step back. You said that to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower, which is
Mhm.
something that someone said in a very recent podcast. I think it was Caterina Costello when we talked about meetings, but it's on a very recent one. When you're looking at subsuming your personality and your drive, that can lead to conflict in the relationships within the team. A couple of times recently on the podcast, people have talked about the importance of conflict in driving new ideas and innovation and so forth. And if everything's at peace, then you don't come up with anything new. How big a part was that? Was everything sweetness and light? I mean, you've talked a bit about the competition there, but was there conflict within the team? Were there arguments? And did you manage to channel that for your own benefit?
Were there arguments? Is it sunny in Jamaica? So I actually started out as a brakeman, and my driver and I, we were like a dysfunctional couple.
Hmm.
We would be arguing and then going to the start line to push the sled, and part of it was, I think, a lack of trust, because he didn't work as hard as I wanted him to work. He didn't focus as much as I wanted him to focus. And he wanted me to simply push the sled faster. And I'm like, dude, we are going to go faster if you learn the lines. And so we would argue to the point where, I went on strike. I'm like, I'm not going back down with him. So we had those issues. I think it's really important. There are others. There are, with the coach, all the way through. But I think if you are mature enough, and again, you bought into the vision of the team, you figure a way to work through those issues, to uh, in order for everybody to succeed.
Would you address that conversation in a different way now than you did then?
Huh, good question. I think it would perhaps more than likely play out the same way. Um, because when I think back to myself and Sammy, for example, my driver, and we were so young in the sport, but even as more experienced drivers, we know that the driver has to. It's kind of like an actor, right? You can't, whether in a movie or TV or on in a play, you can't perform your role if you don't know your lines. And that was the case with driving. That's the case with driving a bobsled. They don't go on rails. You have to figure out the lines and you have to master them. And do you need faster start times? Yes, but you could have the fastest start time in the world. If you're driving crappy lines, you're not going anywhere. Um, and so for me, I think everything is a process, and I recognize that. But you have to be willing to commit to the process, doing what you need to do at this stage as best as you can in order to get to the next level. There's no shortcut.
So if you've got a teammate you don't think is pulling their weight or doing their job, you're going to put the team objective ahead of their personal feelings.
But you have to, though. You absolutely have to. And we've had some strong conversations in the past about why we're here. All in patois, so I would have to, but yeah, we have had some strong conversations about why we are in Calgary and what needs to be done, and let's get focused on that.
Do you think those strong conversations breed trust in the long term and stronger relationships?
I believe so. I don't know that there's any other way. I think you have to have those strong conversations, tempered with kindness. I think it's always important to be kind. You don't. The goal shouldn't be to be right, but to be kind, but to be honest. Because I think in the end, when you're honest and when you develop that reputation of being honest, um, people may not necessarily like the message, but they'll eventually come around to appreciating it, and they'll know in the end that when Andy says something, it's something that to you that it's something that they really mean.
Great. Well, look, let's move on from the cool runnings story and part of your life. I actually want to take a step back because one thing that intrigued me about you is you made a giant leap culturally. You went from the slums of Kingston to Sandhurst Military Academy in the UK, which culturally I can't imagine a much greater gap. So
Yeah.
how did that happen, and how did you experience that difference in cultures and adapt to it?
Yeah. So, as you know, Jamaica is part of the Commonwealth. So, you're talking about being in sixth form earlier before it came on, So after sixth form, I had my A levels, my O levels, and A levels, and that gives you the ticket to apply to join the Jamaica Defense Force as an officer. And then you have to go through this rigorous 3-day selection process, very similar to the what is called a Royal Commission Board in the UK. So you went through all of that, did basic training, and then again they liked my smile. They sent me to Sandhurst. So you know, so I get to Sandhurst, and it was my first time out of Jamaica, man. And sure, there was, and you are aware of the huge differences on so many different levels. Um, But it's only after many years after leaving Sandhurst that I had a chance to really digest what a gigantic leap that was. Because being there, again, the mission was to graduate. The mission was to become an army officer, right? And whatever discomfort that you need to experience to get there, you just kind of buckle down and you get that done. But so yeah, so one, I grew up in Jamaica. We were 98% black, and all of a sudden I'm in the minority. And I remember for all my time in England, every time I went into a room, I would look around. The first thing I did was to look around to see if I saw another black face, just instinctively. Um, so coming from the hood, Andy, so my civilian clothes, we had a thing back in Jamaica where you'd buy some material and you go to the tailor and he would make your trousers for you, right? And there was a particular way in which guys from the hood made theirs with. I remember the measurement: 22 inches at the knee, 22 inches at the ankle. And it looks like bell bottoms, but they're not bell bottoms, right? This is my finest threads. And I remember whenever we got dressed in civils, the guys were, Devon, you're wearing bell bottoms. I'm like, no, they're not bell bottoms, you know? So I kind of stuck out as a sore thumb. Yeah, Sandhurst was, um, yeah, first time I had my own room. First time I slept on my own bed, because I grew up in a little 2-room shack, sleeping on the same bed with 3 other brothers. So there was just so many different um, levels to the experience. But the thing that just like kept me going was, hey, I need to become an army officer. So that when you have a vision, when you have a goal, that keeps you focused, and you get through it. Now I can look back and I go, wow, that was a giant leap. Um, going from one of the most notorious ghettos in the world to the most prestigious military training school in the world.
So what would you say to someone who goes to work in a new role and they feel that they stick out like a sore thumb for whatever reason. But they're a different background to everyone else there. They feel that perhaps there's an element of being outside the clique, if you like. How do you adapt to that, build the relationships that you need to feel accepted? I think there's a difference between becoming accepted and feeling accepted.
You're absolutely right, and interestingly enough, as as much as I felt that I stuck out as a sore thumb at Sandhurst, when I got back to Jamaica and was serving as an officer, I felt even more out of place. And so you're right. How do you begin to feel accepted? And why did I feel out of place? Because on a normal, so I'm sitting in the officers' mess, breaking bread with these men who, under normal circumstances, I'd be back in the hood, up against a wall, being searched by them, right? And here I was as their peer, and I say I had to do a real job on my mind and my thinking. And so, for anyone who goes into a new environment and kind of feel out of sorts, you have to recognize that you actually belong there because you earned it. And which is what I had to keep reminding myself, that nobody gave me any of this. I went through the selection process just like them. In fact, I topped my selection process, and I'm looking around, I'm like, I wonder how many of them came first on theirs, right? I went to Sandhurst just like them. I passed and graduated just like them, right? None of it was given to me. I earned it just like they did. And so, therefore, I deserve my seat at the table.
And did you feel a need to prove it to them, or once you'd proven it to yourself, was that enough for you?
Um, it wasn't so much about proving it to them. It was accepting it and believing it myself, and then doing what I knew I was capable of. I think your work, if you set out to prove things to other people, you sometimes run into trouble. But I think if you focus on you and figure out what you need to do to be your best, um, you'll be okay, I believe.
Absolutely. So, last thing I want to talk about now, it's your career as it is now, and we've alluded to this already. You're speaking and you're coaching, and you're working with a range of businesses. So you're bringing quite an not wholly unique, but a pretty unique perspective together. Someone who's been in elite sports, someone who's been at senior levels of the military, and is now working in business. What would you say are the fundamental qualities and skills that are common to all three, that are really essential to success in whichever arena you operate?
Yeah, yeah. You know, COVID has caused so many of us to kind of rethink our path and what we do, and the word is pivot, right? And I guess I'm one of those. And as I was thinking about how I get through COVID, and how I continue to encourage people, just kind of looking back on my life, I realized, wow, maybe the word is resilience, man. And although I talk, and I have been talking about keep on pushing, persistence and growth, and being the best you can be, I think the thread, the glue that ties it all is this idea of resilience. Because when you think about it, all of us, I think, we have been trained and educated and have all the information about the job that we need to perform. But we don't always perform, and I look at my life. Well, soldiers are trained. As an athlete, I'm trained. But you see sometimes a soldier or an athlete, they fall into these slumps. Salespeople falls into slumps, leaders go wacky at times. And I think the issue is mindset, and having becoming mentally tough, having this mental resilience. I think is a glue that keeps everything together, regardless of what it is that you're trying to achieve, or whatever the circumstances that you're going through. Is just recognizing that you have this ability, and it's one of those things that you get to, quite frankly, develop during in the line of fire. Resilience. You can be grateful, or and so on during good times, but you can't develop resilience unless you are on the fire. So it's part of that is embracing the challenge. Years ago, yeah, I used to watch a Miami Heat basketball team play, and Coach Polstra in the huddle he would always tell them, embrace the challenge, and that's I think what we need to do. That is mental resilience.
So when you find yourself in a slump, you're faced with a big challenge. Do you have any mechanisms you use in order to help you to embrace the challenge and find that resilience you need?
Yeah, the first thing I think is not to allow yourself to get down too much. I mean, you are going to, whenever that thing happens, it's like getting a punch in the emotional solar plexus. And you can't pretend that you're not punched, but at the same time, you can't allow yourself to be buckled to the knee. And so you feel it, and then you have to allow that to dissipate. And the way I do that is by refocusing my mind on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And when you become refocused on what you're trying to accomplish, now you start to figure out alternate ways to get there. Because this one um, route avenue that you're going to use just got blocked. And you go, okay. So you can sit there and stand there looking at the wall, bemoaning, oh my God, what am I going to do? Or you can go, okay, this is where I really need to go. How can I get there? So the first thing is not to allow yourself to get too down. And then secondly, to refocus on the vision, because that then starts to open up the avenues, the doors, the resources, the knowledge that you need to get to where you need to go.
Devon, that's fantastic. We got where we need to go today. So thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, Andy, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's great to connect.
Great. So, if you are watching, thank you, Chandra, for your message. If you're watching, drop us a note. If you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, we haven't quite done yet. So that was our main podcast, which will come out on, I think, the second Monday in July, off the top of my head. Now we're going to do the Thursday podcast, shorter interview, about 15 minutes, where for those of you who haven't heard this before, I have 3 set questions that I asked Devon, and we explore all around professional relationships. So Devon, if you're ready, we'll just jump straight into that.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So the opening question on that is looking at the professional relationships that have had a positive impact on your career. Either who are they, or in what way have strong relationships had a positive impact on you?
Yeah, so in the army we preach man management. I think it's so key to take care of make sure you're adequately addressing the welfare of the people you command. And in addition to that is this idea that although you may the leader, you're the officer, and you have the quote unquote power, you still have a responsibility to conduct yourself in a way that doesn't abuse that power. And I think, my commanding officer, Colonel Douglas, the same one who told me to go to the team trials just because, I think he embodies that, man. He embodies this idea of man management, taking care of the people you command, and then conducting yourself in a way that doesn't um, abuse that power. And so I always think of that, and it reconnects me to the motto at Sandhurst: serve to lead. And I know there's a lot that is said about servant leadership, but I just think it's as leaders, at whatever level in whatever area of human endeavor, we have that responsibility to make sure that you're addressing the needs of the people who are working with you, because when you do that, man, they will move mountains for you. They'll go to hell and back for you.
So do you think that's something the army does a lot better than in other walks of life?
I think so, for perhaps for some different reasons. One, in the army, you give orders and somebody has to follow them. But I think the most effective leaders in the army at any level are the ones who um, don't simply rely on their rank, but on um, treating people like people. Treating people, I often say that you have to learn to treat people as whole persons, not simply as instrument of production. And if you're able to do that, yeah, you get a whole lot more production.
I like that. So that's where we should be aspiring to do, or what we should be trying to achieve. Obviously, not all relationships work out the same way. Where have things gone badly for you? What have you learned from it?
Mm, good question. So I actually go back to my former teammates from the team as we uh, uh, have attempted to work together to develop the next generation of Jamaican bobsledders. I think from my perspective, they say there are always three sides to a story, yours, mine, and the truth in the middle. I think you have to work for anything to work. You kind of have to um, work with people who value you as your equal. Um, we're not talking about hierarchy now in terms of the organization, but as a person, I think. And so if there's one or two people there who think that I'm so much smart and so much capable, and you should be subservient, then it's hard to work, and I don't play the subservient role very well, because it doesn't lead to trust, and if there's no trust, it's hard, uh, impossible actually to really move forward, no matter how noble the goal might be. And so, in the end, for me personally, it comes down to, what, these are my principles, and my the term I use is that my spine is going to stiffen even more, because I'm not going to move off those principles. If that's what I truly believe, I'm not going to move off, and so I may move away, which is what I did, as opposed to move off my principles.
So, do you think there are occasions where your principles are set firm in one area, someone has similar but not quite aligned principles to yours? Is there a way to meet somewhere in the middle, or are you saying if it's not my principles, then I'm gone?
No, I think you have to try to meet in the middle, because you can't make it all about you. And so if there is, I think there has to be a certain amount of give and take. For me personally, I am totally willing, and I've been in this particular situation, totally willing to meet in the middle. But I did not get the sense. In fact, there's more than a sense that I was being met in the middle, and so it's just like, all right, you know what? If that's the case, then we just can't work together, because there's no meeting of the minds in a situation like that.
And just sometimes that's fair enough, isn't it? You can't have the best relationship with everyone in your life.
No, I yet so have come to realize that sucks, but I'm the kind of guy who really would like to get along with everyone. Because I think I'm a nice guy. Obviously, not everybody thinks I'm a nice guy, I guess. No, it is what it is. It's a fact of life. And I think we should all do our best to get along with everyone. But you have to, um, and you have to make the effort to make it happen. But then you have to recognize that sometimes it's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. Finally, Devon, I always ask my guests to share books or talks or podcasts that have either really impacted them in their lives, or that they're particularly enjoying at the moment and would recommend to listeners of the Connected Leadership podcast. So, what stands out for you?
So my go-to book is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I don't know how many people have recommended that one to you, but well, it's um, it offers really good tools for success in every area of our lives, you know. So I really enjoy that book. And I've been listening to The Impact Theory by Tom Bilyeu. I guess it has, well, I have appeared on many podcasts, and I've been on his, but I do enjoy the guests that he presents to us, and the wealth of information that they share with us as well.
Fantastic. Well, Seven Habits, yeah, has been recommended several times. It's something that I talk about in a lot of my presentations and books. Talk the theories of emotional bank accounts or active listening as examples. But we'll put both of those, the book and the podcast, will both go into the show notes. Devon, I think I can safely say that everyone listening to this would agree you're a nice guy. I appreciate you joining me. So thank you very much for being a guest on the Connected Leadership podcast.
It's been awesome. Wonderful to be chatting with you. It's great to be on the Connected podcast. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Devon. So thanks to Devon for joining me. I hope that you've enjoyed this yourself. As I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, I'm going to take a break now for about 10 days. When I come back, which is the week of the 12th of July, keep your eyes and ears peeled, because I looked at my diary earlier and there's at least 3 live broadcasts all lined up for your delectation and delight. So we'll be back on the Connected Leadership podcast the week of the 12th of July. In the meantime, you can download the podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. We've been going since September. I think we're into the episode number 83 or 84. So there's plenty to catch up with in the back catalogue. So please make sure you do that. I see Luciana has said, thank you for some great sharing and some gems. Thank you very much, Luciana. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. And thank you for joining me on the Connected Leadership podcast.